Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in the modest, working-class town of Lynchburg, Virginia, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, during an era when the United States was still reeling from the devastating aftermath of World War I. A conflict that had claimed millions of lives and left countless families shattered by economic hardship, physical disabilities, and deep psychological scars. Poverty was rampant in many American households, including the Doss family, where Desmond grew up in a simple home with his parents, William Thomas Doss and Bertha Edward Doss, along with his siblings. His father, a carpenter by trade and a veteran of the Great War who had served in the U.S. Army, carried the invisible wounds of battle post-traumatic stress that manifested in bouts of heavy drinking and explosive anger, often turning their home into a tense and unpredictable environment. One particularly harrowing night in Desmond's childhood, around the age of 7, etched an indelible mark on his young soul. During a heated, alcohol-fueled argument between his parents, his father drew a loaded pistol on his mother in a fit of rage, threatening her life right before the terrified eyes of young Desmond and his brother. It was only the intervention of Desmond's uncle, who wrested the gun away, that prevented a tragedy. But the incident profoundly traumatized the boy, leading him to make a solemn, unspoken vow that he would never touch a firearm or take another human life, no matter the circumstances, a promise rooted not just in fear, but in a budding sense of moral conviction. This early resolve was further deepened by Desmond's upbringing in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a faith his mother devoutly followed and instilled in her children through regular Bible study and attendance at services. The church's teachings emphasized pacifism, Sabbath observance, and a literal interpretation of the Ten Commandments, particularly the sixth, "Thou shalt not kill." Exodus 20:13. For Desmond, this wasn't merely a religious guideline, but an absolute, unbreakable principle that guided his every decision, blending seamlessly with his personal horror of violence. As he matured into a quiet, unassuming young man, standing at just 5 feet 7 inches with a slight build, he worked various jobs during the Great Depression, including at a shipyard in Newport News, Virginia, where he honed skills in carpentry and mechanics, all while maintaining a vegetarian diet and abstaining from alcohol, tobacco, and even caffeine in line with his Adventist beliefs. He was known among friends and family as kind-hearted and principled, often helping others without seeking recognition. But his life took a dramatic turn when the shadows of another global conflict loomed large on December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor thrust the United States into World War II, igniting a wave of patriotism and a massive draft effort that called upon millions of young American men to defend their nation against the Axis powers. Desmond, then 22 years old, felt an overwhelming sense of duty to serve his country. He believed in the cause of freedom and justice, yet his conscience recoiled at the idea of bearing arms or killing. Unlike many conscientious objectors who sought exemptions or non-combat roles far from the front lines, Desmond chose a path that baffled and frustrated those around him. He voluntarily enlisted in the U.S. Army on April 1, 1942, but registered as a conscientious objector under Section 1AO, meaning he would serve in a medical capacity without weapons. This decision stemmed from his desire to heal rather than harm, to save lives amid the carnage of war, reflecting his interpretation of Christian teachings that emphasized love for one's enemies and turning the other cheek. Assigned to the medical detachment of the 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division, Desmond reported for basic training at Camp Lee, Virginia, and later Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where his refusal to carry a rifle or participate in weapons training immediately set him apart as an anomaly in a military culture that equated manhood with combat readiness. From the outset, Desmond faced relentless ridicule and hostility from his fellow recruits and superiors, who viewed his stance as not only unpatriotic, but potentially life-threatening to the unit. They branded him a coward, a yellow belly, and even a holy roller, subjecting him to verbal abuse. Physical assaults during blanket parties where soldiers would beat him under cover of darkness, and grueling extra duties designed to break his spirit. Officers, including his company commander Captain Jack Glover, attempted to force him out through psychological pressure, denying him leave to marry his fiancée Dorothy Scott, whom he had met at church and wed on August 17, 1942, during a brief furlough, and even initiating court-martial proceedings for insubordination when he refused to work on the Sabbath or handle weapons. Desmond's insistence on observing Saturday as his day of rest added another layer of conflict, as it clashed with the Army's rigid schedule. Yet, through it all, he remained steadfast, drawing strength from prayer, his Bible which he carried everywhere, and letters from home. He appealed the charges, citing his constitutional right to religious freedom, and with the intervention of higher-ups including a letter from his congressman, the Army eventually relented, allowing him to serve unarmed as a medic while respecting his Sabbath observance. This hard-won victory didn't end the bullying, but it showcased Desmond's quiet resilience, earning him a grudging respect from a few comrades who began to see his sincerity after rigorous training that included medical courses where he excelled in first aid, bandaging, and evacuation techniques. Desmond's unit shipped out in 1944, first to Guam and then Leyte in the Philippines, where he saw his first combat action. On Guam, during the Battle of Guam in July-August 1944, he treated wounded soldiers under fire, proving his value by saving lives without hesitation. Even as bullets whizzed by, his actions there began to shift perceptions among his peers, who nicknamed him Preacher or Holy Joe with a mix of affection and amusement. But it was the Battle of Okinawa, commencing on April 1, 1945, that would immortalize him. Okinawa, the largest of the Ryukyu Islands, was a strategic stepping stone for the planned invasion of Japan proper, and the fighting there was among the fiercest of the Pacific theater, with over 82,000 American casualties and an estimated 110,000 Japanese deaths. Desmond's battalion was tasked with capturing Maida Escarpment, a 400-foot sheer cliff dubbed Hacksaw Ridge by the troops due to its jagged, saw like terrain and the relentless slaughter that occurred there. Japanese forces, entrenched in a network of caves, tunnels, and pillboxes, unleashed a hail of artillery, mortars, machine guns, and kamikaze attacks, turning the ridge into a meat grinder where bodies littered the ground and the air reeked of gunpowder, blood, and decay. On April 29, 1945, after weeks of grueling assaults, the 77th Division finally secured a foothold on the ridge. But the cost was immense. Desmond, armed only with his medical kit, plasma bags, morphine syringes, and bandages, repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to drag wounded men to safety, administer aid, and evacuate them via rope ladders down the cliff. His faith sustained him. He often prayed aloud, and his comrades marveled at how he seemed untouchable amid the chaos. The pinnacle of his heroism unfolded on May 5, 1945, during a massive Japanese counterattack involving banzai charges and saturation bombardment that overwhelmed the American positions. As orders came to retreat, leaving behind scores of injured soldiers who cried out in agony, Desmond refused to abandon them. Alone on the ridge, with no weapon for defense and Japanese patrols closing in, he methodically searched the battlefield under cover of darkness and smoke, locating the wounded by their moans and whispers. One by one, he bandaged their injuries, gave them water and morphine, then dragged or carried them sometimes over 100 yards through mud and craters to the cliff's edge. There, he ingeniously fashioned a double bowline knot from ropes, lowering each man 35 to 40 feet to medics below, all while dodging grenades, sniper fire, and artillery shells that exploded mere feet away hour after hour. Through the night and into dawn, Desmond repeated this grueling process, whispering his simple prayer after each rescue. Lord, help me get just one more. By the time reinforcements arrived the next morning, he had single-handedly saved an astonishing 75 men, though some estimates ranged from 50 to 100, many of whom would have perished otherwise. Eyewitness accounts from survivors, including Captain Glover, who later admitted, "Doss, you saved my life too," described miracles, bullets grazing his helmet, shrapnel missing him by inches, and Japanese soldiers seemingly overlooking him in the confusion. Exhausted and dehydrated, Desmond continued his duties until May 21, when a Japanese grenade exploded near him during another assault, peppering his legs and back with 17 pieces of shrapnel and breaking his left arm. Even then, he treated his own wounds with a makeshift splint from a rifle stock, ironically, the only time he used a gun, and waited 5 hours for evacuation, insisting that others be helped first. While being carried on a litter, he spotted a more severely wounded soldier and rolled off to give him the spot. Moments later, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm further, forcing his final removal from the field. Desmond spent months recovering in hospitals, battling infections and undergoing surgeries. But his spirit remained unbroken. On October 12, 1945, President Harry S. Truman personally presented him with the Medal of Honor at the White House. citing his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty. He became the only conscientious objector to receive this honor during World War II and one of only 3 in U.S. history, joining the ranks of legends like Audie E. Murphy. The citation detailed how his actions reflected great credit upon himself, the 1st Battalion, and the United States Army. Post-war, Desmond returned to civilian life, marrying Dorothy and fathering a son, Desmond Jr., in 1946. Plagued by war injuries, including partial deafness from a later tuberculosis diagnosis linked to his service, he lived modestly on a farm in Rising Fawn, Georgia, working odd jobs and advocating for peace through speaking engagements and his autobiography, The Unlikeliest Hero. He passed away on March 23, 2006, at age 87, and was buried with full military honors at the Chattanooga National Cemetery. Desmond Doss's story, immortalized in the 2016 film Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson, which earned critical acclaim and multiple Academy Award nominations, transcends military history. It embodies the profound power of conviction in the face of adversity. In an age of mechanized warfare and moral ambiguity, he demonstrated that heroism isn't defined by the weapons one wields, but by the lives one preserves, that faith can be a shield stronger than steel, and that refusing to kill doesn't equate to cowardice, but to a higher form of bravery. His legacy endures as an inspiration to soldiers, pacifists, and everyday people alike, reminding us that even in the darkest hells of human conflict, choosing compassion over destruction can illuminate the path to true valor and redemption.